Say to you, David, I'm very flattered. I used to have lots of illustrious titles in Chatham House. Today I'm an associate fellow, not a senior fellow.
I beg your pardon.
For good and ill. No, I have to, I have to clear myself. There's disclosure and all of this, but the flattery is appreciated. I have three things to say. One point is dramatic, one is disagreeable, and one is encouraging. At least that's the intention. The dramatic point is this. Vladimir Putin cannot afford to lose in Ukraine, and he cannot be allowed to win. Russia has unleashed a people's war in this country, and it is confronting them with problems they never expected and which could doom Putin's entire post-imperial project. Ukraine can become the graveyard of Russian neo-imperialism, if Ukraine succeeds. But if Ukraine loses, we all lose. If this country dissolves in fragmentation and turmoil, there will be profoundly destabilizing effects in the entire neighborhood, from Belarus to Moldova to Georgia. There will be profound demoralization of NATO allies in the Baltic states, already in need of reassurance. And Poland is not as confident as we all imagine. And the West's ability to address other security problems will be further impaired, as will our ability to address the financial challenges we face. And finally, the image and standing and cohesion of NATO and the EU will be profoundly damaged. All of this is understood by the Secretary General of NATO, by Sandy Vershbow, who you heard this morning, and by SACEUR General Breedlove, and it is understood by most leading governments. That is my first point. The disagreeable point is this, two sides to it. There has never been a universal security system that provided security. The only effective security systems are those based on common interests and common values of members. For this reason, Ukraine's quest to join NATO is worthy, it deserves support, and ultimately it deserves to succeed. But the truly disagreeable element of what I want to say is this. The pursuit of that objective in the midst of this war will divert attention and scarce resources from far more vital tasks, namely three: the consolidation of this country, the deterring of further aggression, and the ending of the occupation regime in Crimea and Donbass. And the enterprise is also doomed to disappointment. I ask you to consider for all of 12 seconds the following question. If today the leading NATO member states are unwilling to provide Ukraine with defensive weaponry, is it remotely realistic to imagine the 28 NATO member states will invite Ukraine to be the 29th? The Baltic states are not a model here. They're not a model because the Baltic states were admitted to NATO at a time when NATO's allies wrongly persuaded themselves that war was no longer a tool of policy in Europe. And if that decision had to be taken in 2014 rather than 2024, I am not sure they would be members today. I would be profoundly unhappy about this, but this is political reality, and this is what we are here to address.
But don't you think that just on that point, that political reality is already acknowledged, isn't it, by the President, by the government?
I hope it is. I hear different voices. And the point I'm making is one of priorities, and in more technical terms, it's one of sequencing. Okay. So there is no quarrel, at least for me, about the ultimate goal. But let me move on to, finally, my last point is intended to be more encouraging. What we have, not universally, but what the gentleman I referred to from NATO share with Ukraine, what I think principal governments share with Ukraine, is something very valuable. It is a mutual strategic interest. It needs to be built upon and made more effective. That requires the establishment of a system of deterrence inside Ukraine, It's not sufficient to strengthen the system of deterrence on Ukraine's western borders. It must be established and strengthened inside Ukraine, and that demands from NATO military support, not indiscriminate military support, but intelligent military support to remedy critical vulnerabilities. Secure communications are not arms, but even a well-armed force that lacks them will be annihilated. So this is a battle which must be fought, and I believe it can be won. Today, the entire Obama administration is in favor of arming Ukraine, with the exception of President Obama himself. That's not an insignificant exception, but if you look at that, you do not walk away from this and say this battle is unwinnable. Secondly, what it requires from Ukraine is the transformation of its state military organization. Because what we need to come out of this NATO-Ukraine relationship is joint work. Not just training, planning, the reconstruction and improvement of command and control systems of the entire command structure. That means a system which is open to reform and reforming. What we find instead is a defense system deeply damaged by Yanukovych, which is not being addressed and not being repaired. And despite some outstanding members of it still in place, this system today is for the most part closed, opaque, defensive, jealous of its priorities, resistant to new ideas, and run on the basis of ruchnoye upravlение, manual control. And this is why, this morning, Sandy Vershbow singled out for praise the National Security and Defense Council and did not mention the Ministry of Defense at all. That is what is between the lines. NATO is publicly expressing its frustration about this. All that we can do in this regard is explain the problem and pound the table. But this is a problem that Ukrainians have to address themselves.
James, thank you very much.